What if you had invested just £1,000 in Bitcoin 10 years ago? Not a huge amount. Not life-changing money at the time. Just £1,000. How much would that be worth today? Bitcoin has been one of the most controversial and emotional assets in financial history. Some people called it a scam. Others called it the future of money. Most people ignored it completely. 10 years ago, Bitcoin wasn't mainstream. It wasn't on the news every night. Banks weren't talking about it. And very few people thought it would become what it is today. Back then, Bitcoin wasn't priced in tens of thousands. It wasn't even close. It was trading in the hundreds. If you had taken £1,000 and bought Bitcoin around that time, you wouldn't have owned a tiny fraction of a coin. You would have owned multiple whole Bitcoins. And that's where this story starts to get interesting. Because Bitcoin didn't rise smoothly. It didn't reward patience right away. It moved violently. There were huge rallies. There were brutal crashes. There were long stretches where it felt completely dead. Bitcoin doubled. Then it halved. Then it disappeared from headlines. Then it came back stronger than before. Most people didn't hold through that. They bought after hype. They sold after fear. They watched volatility turn opportunity into regret. But let's imagine a different scenario. You invested that £1,000. And then you did nothing. No trading. No panic selling. No checking the price every hour. You just held. Years passed. Bitcoin survived exchange hacks, regulatory threats, and non-stop skepticism. Slowly, adoption grew. More people paid attention. Institutions entered the market. Bitcoin went from a fringe experiment to a global financial asset discussed by governments, hedge funds, and central banks. Now pause for a moment, because this matters. This video is not financial advice. It's a historical look at what happened in the past. Nothing here is a recommendation. We're looking backward, not predicting the future. Fast forward to today. Bitcoin is no longer obscure. Its price has reached levels that once seemed impossible. And suddenly, that £1,000 decision from 10 years ago looks very different. At today's prices, the Bitcoin you bought back then would now be worth well into six figures. Not thousands. Not tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands of pounds. But here's the part most people don't talk about. That return didn't come easily. Bitcoin dropped more than 70% multiple times along the way. There were years where holding felt pointless. Years where selling felt like the smart move. If you needed that money during a crash, the outcome would change completely. If you sold at the wrong time, the gains disappear. That's the reality of extreme volatility. Now compare that to traditional investments. Stocks, index funds, and gold produced steadier returns over the same decade. Less dramatic. Less emotional. Less explosive. Bitcoin offered extraordinary upside, but demanded extraordinary patience. And that's the real lesson here. This wasn't about timing the bottom. It wasn't about predicting the top. It was about holding through uncertainty when most people couldn't. When people ask, What if I invested £1,000 in Bitcoin 10 years ago? They're really asking something deeper. Could I have handled the volatility? Could I have ignored the noise? Could I have stayed invested when it felt uncomfortable? Because very few people actually did. So let's put a clear number on it. If you had invested £1,000 in Bitcoin around 10 years ago, and held through all the ups and downs, that investment would be worth roughly £180,000 to £200,000 today, depending on the exact buy date and current price. £1,000 to nearly £200,000. But that outcome wasn't guaranteed. It came with risk, uncertainty, and long periods of doubt. Bitcoin rewarded long-term holders, but it tested them every step of the way. That's the real story behind the numbers. If you want more long-term investing breakdowns like this, without hype and without noise, follow for signal, not noise.